Here I've laid out some of the base colors we're going to be using for painting our sunset image. I'm mixing dioxazine violet, or known as Egyptian violet, into the Italian terra verte to mix our darkest dark. And the reason it is more of a violet than a blue for the shadow color is that at that time of day, with that extreme lighting condition and that warm, warm light pouring in, the shadow colors are going to be more violet than blue. So the time of day is overriding the time of year. And you can see that if you look closely at the image, at those shadows, that they're more violet than they are blue. In that second pile of Italian terra verte, I am just mixing in a bit of what was on the back of my knife from mixing the first dark, and then adding a little bit more of that mixture as needed to make a value that is a little bit lighter and a little bit greener, but still distinctly different, but related to that first color. So if I need a little bit more violet, I'm going to pick that up on my knife to go and mix into the yellow ochre. The yellow ochre is forming the base color for our fields. So I'm going to mix a dark for the field that has that same violet in it, because remember, we're going to have a lower contrast in the foreground in that land. So we need to have those colors, hue-wise, very closely related. So every color that's in the foreground is going to have that violet as one of the base colors. So I'm mixing enough violet into the yellow ochre that it is lighter than at the next green violet down, and still closely related to it. It's lighter and it's warmer. And just as I did in the last section and pile, I'm going to take some of what was on the back of my knife and mix it into the next pile of yellow ochre. If I need to add a little bit more violet to it to bring it down to where there's a nice interval between the two, hue-wise and value-wise, I'll reach up and grab a little bit more of the violet. Mix that really thoroughly so that you don't have any little bits of streaming color in the middle of your yellow ochre pile. And then again, I'm going to take just a little bit, what was on the back of the knife, and add that to the next pile of yellow ochre. This is the lightest color in the fields that I'm going to be using, and it doesn't need to have very much violet added to it at all, but we want to just take the edge off of the intensity of the pure yellow ochre. You might not think of yellow ochre as being an intense color, but when it is contrasted with the neutral mixed from the violet and yellow ochre that it's next to, it becomes quite intense, as you'll see when we put it onto the field. So now we're going to be working on the colors that are in the row above. These are the colors that are going to go closest to the horizon in the sky. And again, they're all going to be closely related. As we have worked before, we're working in basically groups of 2 to 3 sets of values, hues, and intensities that are closely related. So I also want you to think about how these colors are relating to the row below. You'll notice that they are complementary colors to the colors below. Remember, we are working on high contrast in hue. Strongest contrast in hue comes from using complementary colors. So we're going to be using Indian yellow and 2 different values of Indian yellow, a medium range value of medium to medium light range value of Indian yellow mixed from Indian yellow and white. And then we're going to mix a lighter pile of that with Indian yellow and more white. So watch as we mix those 2 piles. Then next to that, we're going to be working with Montserrat orange and Indian yellow to create the oranges and the pinks for the sky. The Indian yellow is an almost absolute contrast to the violets below. It is the opposite side of the color wheel. It is going to give us our strongest illusion of strong afternoon, late afternoon light. So in the pile next to it, we have, well, in the 3 piles next to it, we have 3 piles of Montserrat orange, and I'm adding different amounts of Indian yellow to them. In the far left pile of Montserrat orange, in that far left pile of Montserrat orange, there's very little Montserrat orange, and it's mostly Indian yellow. So you'll see that it very closely relates to that pile of pure Indian yellow and white, and it acts as a transition towards the more pure pile of Montserrat orange on the far right. That middle pile is about half Montserrat and half Indian yellow. Our first one was about 2/3 Indian yellow and 1/3 Montserrat. So we're having a fairly even transition here hue-wise. All of these are equally intense, but we're just changing the hues. So in this row we have equally intense colors, but we are changing the hues. In this final pile of Montserrat orange in the end, it is mainly Montserrat with a little tiny bit of Indian yellow to knock the edge off of the color as it comes out of the tube. You want to have a little bit of the Indian yellow in there to have it visually connect to the color that you see on the far left, which is the Indian yellow and white. So here we're now starting to mix our blues for the sky. The blue of the sky at the top is going to be a mixture of ultramarine blue and white with a little bit of phthalo blue in it. It's predominantly ultramarine. So in our first pile, we've got that ultramarine blue and white. Now we're mixing it to get the correct value for that blue at the top. So we're putting in enough ultramarine into the white to get that blue to the correct value. Then we're taking the paint that's on the back of the knife and mixing a little bit of that into the second pile so that it will be lighter, and then adding a little phthalo blue to that so that it will change the hue as well as the value. This is going to be the color towards the top of the sky. Mix it thoroughly so you don't have any little streamers of phthalo blue in there that suddenly pop up in your painting. In that last pile, I'm going to pull off some of that white and grab a little bit of the ultramarine blue that we already have there to mix a slightly lighter value of ultramarine blue that we're going to use for some of those little streaming clouds that you see up there towards the top. Remember, clouds are almost never white. They simply are a different value, hue, and intensity from the sky color behind them. I'm also adding another pile of white there so that I can mix a lighter variation of that Indian yellow and white that we have. So make sure you wipe off and clean your knife as you move between colors. And taking a tiny little bit of the yellow orange, because this again is going to closely relate to the Indian yellow that we have on to the right of it and to the other areas of yellow orange. Will be some of the streaming clouds that we see on top of the yellow. Wipe really carefully, can't emphasize that enough. Then we're going to take a tiny little bit of that phthalo blue and mix it into our final pile of white, which is going to be the lightest of the blues. And then we'll add a tiny little bit of the Indian yellow and white to it in order to make our very lightest blue. Here you can see it right up there, the three piles. And here we have our palette laid out.